The whole black history aspect, it's a very partisan thing, but we hear nothing about it today, but it is so well documented.
Many of our greatest revolutionary heroes were patriots of African descent.
Why is it so many blacks were the victims of the Klan? It's real simple. If you were black in America, you were Republican back then.
Many courageous and effective black leaders played pivotal roles in our government as early as the late 1800s.
Had it not been for Republicans, the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the Voting Rights Act of '65 would not have passed.
What is the story and inspiration behind these great patriots and heroes of the faith? And why have so many of their stories remained silent? Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage series. America, this is your heritage.
African American history has been a steady procession of progress, but so much of that progress really began to accelerate in the era that we call Reconstruction. That's where you have the introduction of the first civil rights amendments to the Constitution. The first civil rights constitutional amendment was done in 1865. That was the 13th Amendment. It abolished slavery. It was done during the Civil War. It was a very partisan amendment.
Right. In
that amendment, you had 100% of Republicans who voted to end slavery. You only had 23% of Democrats who wanted to end slavery. Right after that amendment was done, we come to the end of the Civil War. So now the South, that had really separated to form a pro-slavery nation, and that's not my opinion, that is their secession documents.
Right.
The documents of secession of the South, of those 11 states that seceded, said that they did so to preserve slavery. The Confederate Constitution actually totally prohibits any state from ending slavery. That's how set they were on keeping slavery, is they're claiming states' rights, but they won't even allow their own states to end slavery. So they're very adamant on that. The speech, one of the early speeches in the Confederacy given by the Vice President, Alexander Stephens, called slavery the cornerstone of the Confederacy. And it literally was. So you get to the end of the Civil War shortly after you abolish slavery, and now you've got all these states who separated to have slavery, and they've got to come back into the Union somehow. But you've got to convince them that if you're going to get back in, you have to do so upholding the 13th Amendment. Slavery's got to be over. Well, they wouldn't. They said, all right, so what? You freed all the slaves, but they're not going to be citizens of our state. We're not going to let them be citizens of Louisiana or Georgia or Texas or whatever. So Congress says, oh, let's do a little arm twisting here. So they come up with the 14th Amendment that says that a freed slave is a citizen of the state in which he lives. So what had happened was in the South, you had two types of citizens. You had state citizens and you had others just living there. Free blacks who can't be citizens. The federal Constitution says, no, 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 that stops right now. You live in a state, you're a citizen of that state, that's the end of it. So that when it came time to vote on that in the federal Congress, now remember after the Civil War, the Southern Democrats have now joined back to the Union. So we had the Northern Democrats, we had the Southern Democrats, we had the Republicans. They're all back together, and so they're back in Congress now. Northern and Southern Democrats and Republicans. Comes time to vote on the 14th Amendment that says that these former slaves get civil rights. Not a single Democrat in Congress voted for the 14th Amendment. Not a single, it's a matter of public record, not a single one.
What year was that?
That was 1868. You still have trouble in the southern states. There's a lot going on that says, well, they may be citizens, but we're going to pass laws that say that colors of citizens can't vote. You can't have blacks vote. So Congress came in 1870 and passed the 15th Amendment that says you cannot be deprived of your right to vote on the basis of your color. Real simple stuff. It's a reaction to what's going on in the southern states. The 15th Amendment is what guarantees blacks the right to vote. People think, well, it's the Voting Rights Act. No, no, no. The Voting Rights Act does not grant right to vote. Voting Rights Act only helps enforce certain counties that used to use literacy tests. It's a very specific law. The right to vote is given by the 15th Amendment. It is unabridgable. I mean, it is right there, real simple. The new constitutions were eventually passed, and a number of black Americans were elected to national office under those new constitutions. This 1872 print by Currier and Ives shows the first 7 black Americans elected to the U.S. Congress. Significantly, all 7 were Republicans. On the left side of the picture is Hiram Rhodes Revels from Mississippi. An ordained minister, he served as a missionary and pastor, recruited 3 black regiments, and was a chaplain during the Civil War. Revels became America's first black U.S. senator. Next is Benjamin Turner of Alabama. Turner was a slave during the Civil War, but within 5 years after the war, he had become a wealthy and prosperous businessman. Next is Robert DeLarge of South Carolina. Born as a slave, within 3 years of the end of the war, he was serving in the State House. He also chaired the Republican Party's platform committee and became a statewide elected official. Next is Josiah Waltz of Florida. Waltz was a slave during the Civil War and was forced to fight for the Confederate Army. After he was captured by Union troops, however, he promptly enlisted as a Union soldier and even became an officer. After his election to Congress, his credentials were challenged by Democrats and he was twice sent home. He was reelected after the first challenge, but during the second challenge, Democrats regained control of Florida and he was prevented from returning. Next is Jefferson Long of Georgia. Born as a slave, he was self-educated and built a thriving business. However, when elected to Congress as a Republican, Democrats boycotted his business, causing him great financial losses. Long was the first black American to deliver a congressional speech in the U.S. House. Next is Joseph Hayne Rainey of South Carolina. Born a slave, he actually served briefly as Speaker of the U.S. House and was in Congress longer than any other black American from that era. The seventh is Robert Brown Eliot, also of South Carolina. He was well educated, reading in Spanish, French, and Latin. In Congress, he led in the passage of civil rights bills over the strident opposition of congressional Democrats, and he later became Speaker of the House in the state legislature. Now, as you move forward, because of the 14th Amendment, we can elect African Americans to Congress, and so these guys, and they're all Republicans, they joined with white Republicans. They passed 23 civil rights laws. Those 23 civil rights laws they passed, they ended segregation. They said you can no longer have distinctions on the basis of marriage. You can't have distinctions on the basis of property. You can't have distinctions in the military. I mean, it was really terrible, the things that, well, you can have courts for white, but you can't let blacks go into court. Now, whites can own property, blacks can't own property. So they have all these things. It gets wiped out. 23 laws that wipe all that out. The last civil rights law that they passed was in 1875. Do you know the next time Congress passed a civil rights law? It was 89 years later.
Oh my goodness.
Between 1861 and 1875, 14 years, we passed 23 civil rights laws. It stopped in 1875, and we didn't do it again until 1964. Why? Because in 1876, Democrats regained partial control of Congress. When Republicans had House and Senate and President, they're zipping these civil rights laws through. 1876, Democrats get back the House. That stops right there. Well, so for the next period of time, what you have is you've stopped civil rights laws, and in the South, you've kind of lost the end of Reconstruction, and the South is starting to get really violent now. You have all these slave owners, all these racist mentality people who are willing to form their own nation on the basis of race, and now you're trying to say that my elected representatives are black? I'm not going to do this. Well, in Democratic states, not only do you have Republicans, you've got black Republicans. So nationally, in 1866, to stop this forward progress, there was a group that was started to keep Republicans out of office. The group that was started in 1866, we recognize today, but it was the Ku Klux Klan. It was started by Democrats. And people say, well, they were started to whack blacks. No, they weren't. They were started to whack Republicans. You see,
Okay,
that's huge.
Yeah, just let me
all those
stop you right there for a moment.
off, listen up.
Restate that if you would.
the Klan was started in 1866 by Democrats to whack Republicans and allow Democrats to regain control. But why is it so many blacks were the victims of the Klan? It's real simple. If you were black in America, you were Republican back then.
Many of our